Hello and welcome to the Page and Stage podcast, where we explore the art and craft of writing and performance. I'm your host, Jason Cannon. This podcast is made possible solely through the support of listeners like you. If you're enjoying this show, I encourage you to do two things. First, tell a friend. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. And second, visit pageandstage.art. That's pageandstage.art and click on support. You'll then be able to make a donation that helps cover the cost of producing this podcast, or even become a backer and set up a monthly recurring donation in any amount. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your messages and encouragement, and thank you for your support. My guest today is Broadway playwright and actress Sandy Rustin, who has been named by American Theater Magazine as one of the most produced playwrights in the U.S. thanks to her adaptation of Clue, which has had over 4,000 productions worldwide. Sandy's original comedy, The Cottage, premiered last summer on Broadway. Her next original comedy, The Suffragettes' Murder, will premiere in 2025 at the Paper Mill Playhouse. And her next original musical, Houston, winner of the New American Musical Award, is in development with Grammy Award winner Edie Brickell. Sandy also penned the musical stage adaptation of the MGM film Mystic Pizza, as well as the concert adaptations of I Married an Angel and Dear World, which was a New York Times Critics pick, for New York City Center Encores. Sandy has developed works for Disney, STX Entertainment, Primary Wave Music, and Mattel. And if I kept listing all her other credits and awards, we'd never get to the actual interview, in which it is revealed that Sandy and I are both turning 48 years old this very month. Here we go with my conversation with Sandy Rustin. I am joined today by the prolific Sandy Rustin. It is such a delight to have you on my podcast, Sandy. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Jason. I'm happy to be here.
This is really exciting for me because we worked on a couple things a few years ago. I even got to direct one of your plays, The Cottage, which then went to Broadway, where another Jason Alexander, also directed it.
Yeah.
So some kind of kismet there. But I wanted to start by asking you about Waggles Pierre.
Oh, that's so sweet. My childhood doggy.
Yes. What kind of dog was Waggles?
Waggles was a Bichon Frise.
Beautiful dog. Beautiful dog.
And we named him Waggles Pierre because I was 8 when we got him, and I was desperate for a dog, and I had just wanted a dog named Waggles. But then when we got him, my mom thought it was not fair to name a Bichon Frise not a French name. So she wanted to honor his heritage. And so she said, okay, we can name him Waggles, but the middle name will be Pierre. And that was it. So his name was Waggles Pierre.
That's so funny. It reminds me of my Aunt Melly got a dog and wanted to name her dog Fred desperately. But her husband at the time was in med school, and he was like, Fred? Okay, we can name the dog Fred if we name it P capital H R-E-D. So it tied into the whole medical thing. So kudos to your mom for holding the line.
Yes.
But apparently, Waggles was an inspiration to you. You started out as a writer, like you said you were 8. This is around 6th grade. And that was your first book, right? When you were in 6th grade?
Oh, in the 6th grade, I think are you talking about the little bio blurb that I shared with you?
About your mom.
Yes.
You wrote it about your mom.
It was a Mother's Day book to my mom that was like one of those like roses are red, violets are blue, you're the best mom and I love you kind of a book. Right. So by book, like let's say book real loose there.
That's all right. That's okay.
But yes, I did. I believe I did offer a little nod to Waggles Pierre in that little bio there.
Inspiration and support can come from anywhere.
That's right.
So did you always know you wanted to be a storyteller? Because we're going to get into your career a bit because it's multifaceted all over the place. But this is specifically writing in this case.
Yeah.
What was your first storyteller like motor, your first drive to do that?
So, I mean, to hear my parents talk about it, I sang before I spoke. I used to use my grandparents had a dog when I was a toddler, and I turned the dog leash into a microphone by the time I was 2 years old. So I think it was just something in me. Yeah. I used to I would be, gravitate to the television when the Mandrell sisters were on performing. My grandfather used to watch them religiously. And I just was attracted to the stage, to things happening on a stage, to the lights, to the costumes, to the sparkles, to the music. And so from a very, very young age, that's just what I loved. I wanted to go to the theater. I wanted to dress up to go to the theater. And I think by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I sort of knew that if there was a life for me where it involved a stage, in any capacity, that's what I wanted. And by the time I graduated college with a degree in theater, when people would ask me, what do you want to do? I never really said, I want to be an actor or I want to be a playwright. I've always answered, I want to live a life in the theater. And I think that knowing that has offered me a broader landscape of how I've interacted with the theater throughout my professional life, because it has changed and morphed and evolved through the years. And so I've gotten to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that in every which way. And it's made me really happy to be able to do that. So I don't think I was ever specifically like, I must grow up and only be a playwright. Although I always knew I wanted to write for the theater as one of the things that I wanted to do when I grew up.
Great. So the first way in though, what was acting first and then the writing?
I think singing was first, to be honest.
Singing was
Was
first. Okay.
music. Yeah, music and dance from the time I was really little. My first part, I played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, I think in the second or third grade, and Annie by the sixth grade. My first professional job outside of college, I played Sandy in the Broadway tour of Grease. That was so fun. And so I was working pretty steadily as a singer, a dancer, an actor. And it really wasn't until I became a parent in my late 20s that I decided to make my passion for writing, which I had written my high school musical and I was part of the writing team for my college musical. And I was always writing and did a ton of
Yeah.
sketch writing and stuff like that. But it wasn't really until I became a parent that I decided to pursue writing for the stage professionally.
Was that because of touring? Was it a time commitment type of thing? Was it easier to be home? What was the impetus?
Yeah.
You've used that parent thing. Is that what kind of happened there?
Kind of, yeah. I had been doing 8 shows a week as an actor, and I got
Right.
pregnant with my first son. And the plan was to take a maternity leave and after the baby was born, go back into the show. And that was the plan. And then I had that baby and I was shocked to discover that I loved something more than the theater. I was like, oh my gosh. And it was really sort of a crisis of conscience because I knew I was going to love being a parent, but I didn't really expect for my whole self-identity to shift. And it really did.
Yeah.
So I took a second. My oldest son's, first year, my husband had this wonderful full-time job, which afforded me the luxury to really just be a mom. During that time, I did not go back to the show. I left the show. And when he was about 6 or 7 months old, I started to just feel creatively kind of itchy. And
Yeah.
so I went back to Upright Citizens Brigade in New York. After I'd put him to bed at 7 or 8 at night, I would take a class at night once a week in improv comedy or sketch writing, something I loved. And gradually over his sort of first couple of years of life, I rediscovered that part of myself that loved writing comedy. And I had really encouraging teachers. And it was from those classes at UCB when Isaac was a baby that it kind of inspired me to take myself more seriously as a writer. And yeah, by the time he was in elementary school, I had my first show written and produced in New York. Yeah.
I want to come back to that.
Okay.
You said something really interesting about having to wrestle with your entire identity shifting.
Yes.
And even on your website now, it says writer, actress, raising mensches.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a hardcore trio right there.
Yeah.
But when you say raising mensches, right, to the public, what does that mean in terms of you, in terms of identity as a mother, as a storyteller? Why is that one of your 3 primary things on your website?
That's a great question. Motherhood really sort of was the impetus and the inspiration for my adult creative life. The 2 things kind of happened at the same time. I was discovering myself and my voice as a writer at the same time that I was starting to raise children. And in fact, when I had my Broadway debut last summer, the opening of the Cottage on Broadway was the same week that my oldest son turned 18.
Oh,
And
man.
and it felt to me exactly right. Like, yes, as long as it took me to raise a whole entire man, That's how long it took to simultaneously pursue this dream and passion. It wasn't a race. It wasn't, it wasn't going to happen in my 20s. It wasn't going to happen in my 30s because I was really in the thick of it with small children. And that was a choice that I made, but I didn't give up on it. I was just kind of doing two things at once, which is an anomaly. You can't really do two things at once. So it's a
Right.
constant give and take. But I really feel that for me, parenthood has been very much part of the equation of my life as a theater artist. And I take it into account and I take it seriously. It's part of who I am and what I do. And it's weird. Now I'm kind of staring down the barrel of becoming an empty nester in a few more years.
Right. Because your
Um,
second son is not
he's
far behind.
Yeah, he's a freshman in high school, so I have a
Right.
few more years. And then, I had my kids young, so I'll sort of be a young empty nester, relatively speaking, I guess. And I feel like there's so much ahead of me now
Right.
professionally to look forward to, and maybe I will go back to performing 8 shows a week again, or who knows? So I just feel kind of open to what's next. But for now, I'm still in the business of raising these men.
Raising another man.
Yes.
Yes. Just a second ago, you mentioned going back to UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade. And if
Yes.
I read this correctly in your bio, you spent upwards of 15 years working training with UCB, and they tend to be more in the world of improv and sketch. And
Yes.
so my question more is about how does that kind of improv sketch brain weave itself into your playwriting?
Yeah.
Do you find the same skills come in? Does it help you with dialogue, with scene structure? Like the playwriting is such a, this 2-act, 2-hour long thing versus 3-minute sketches or making it up on your feet. How do those meld for you as you work on one or the other?
Sure. Great question. So, well, first of all, I do love improv comedy and I do love sketch writing, but I did also go to college and had a major in theater with a dual focus in performance and playwriting. So I
Okay.
also was, had had a lifetime of experience with 1-act and 2-act plays and musicals and, real training in the art of playwriting as well. But to answer your question, I do think that a freedom comes from learning improv and sketch
Mm,
writing because
yeah.
you're just going with your instinct. It's much more of a gut art form where where you have like 1 second to make a decision about what you think is the correct, most straightforward or honest path forward. And so I bring a lot of that into my writing style of just sitting down and allowing myself the space and freedom to just go, what's my best idea in the moment, and don't worry about it and get it on the page and know that I can always go back and edit. The difference between improvisation and playwriting is that in improvisation, the moment is there, you do what you can in the moment, you move forward. In playwriting, you can act upon that initial instinct, get it on the page, but you have the luxury of being able to go back and say,
Yeah.
actually, I have a better idea now. Or what if I tried it this way instead? But that initial improvised dump, I guess, when you first put it on the page, that it allows you to get the instinct out of your heart and soul onto the page. And then you can have the discipline then as a writer to go back and reshape and edit. And that's really, I think, where the work comes into play.
I think there might be a title in there for like some kind of comedy manual saying like
Ugh, improvised dump. Oh
gut
no.
art and the improvised dump. I think
Yeah.
there's
Very gastro look at writing. Oh dear.
gastro art.
Yeah.
So this comedy thing is a theme throughout a lot of your work. You that's kind of your wheelhouse. From Cottage to Suffragettes Murder to you mentioned you have a new one you're working on, which I want to give you space to talk about. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about why comedy, and also a lot of your plays are very intentionally kind of feminist framed.
Hmm.
I remember when we were working on Suffragettes Murder and Cottage especially, it was a super intentional choice on your part. And I would just kind of I'm just kind of this is a huge question, Sandy, but
Yeah,
it's
no, that's
comedy,
okay.
feminism,
Yeah.
3 different plays, kind of in terms of this goes to your identity though too, as a comedic feminist playwright, for lack of like a stickier term. Why is that the field you choose to frolic in? What does that do for you, and why do you think your voice fits there so well?
So growing up, I had a really funny dad. My dad was a pediatrician, but he was a bit of an amateur comedian. And so when we would, be in the car or just around on a Sunday afternoon, instead of having music playing, we had comedy albums playing in my house. So
Oh,
I grew up listening to Jackie Mason, Elaine May, Mike Nichols, Lily Tomlin. This was the fabric of my youth. By the time I was 7 years old, my dad and I had an Abbott and Costello Who's on First routine memorized. I knew both parts. We performed
Of
it at
course.
parties. So the rhythm and the way that a punchline, a setup punchline works was just kind of in the background of my upbringing. And so I think when I sat down to start writing, it was my natural inclination to emulate the rhythms and styles that I had become accustomed to in the stand-up that I had listened to growing up. And I loved it. It made me laugh, and I felt great laughing. My dad got really sick when I was 17 years old, and he had a really tragic chronic illness through my entire adulthood.
Mm.
And comedy was our medicine. It
Oh,
just
yeah.
it felt important in a way that sometimes I think people are quick to dismiss comedy. I found it wildly healing, and it was comfort to me, like comfort food, like chicken soup. And it's something that I shared with my dad. It's something that, it just made me feel good. So when I went to set out to be a writer myself and to explore my own voice as a writer, it came out in my comfort food language. And it wasn't necessarily intentional at first. I didn't sit down and say, I want to be a comedic feminist writer.
Right.
I just started writing and discovered that's where my voice was most comfortable. And even, I have this play that I'm developing now called Houston, which I wrote maybe 10 years ago. Now I'm developing into a musical with Edie Brickell, actually, which is so
Oh,
exciting.
wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. But that play is a serious play. It's about a budding romance that happens against the backdrop of this young girl and man's parents, their fathers, undergoing bone marrow transplants. And it's really a life
Mm.
and death. But it's a romantic comedy. And I thought,
Of course.
whatever subject I choose, whichever lane I go in, the dialogue, the way that the people interact with each other, it comes out in a natural comedic way, a gentle banter. It's just where
Mhm.
my voice is. My huge influences, writers that I looked up to, were Nora Ephron, Neil Simon,
Yeah.
they had that similar way about them. That was this gentle, thoughtful, comedic voice. And that's what I look to emulate, and that's what I love so much. So that's where the comedy piece comes from. The feminist piece, I don't know that I set out to be a feminist writer necessarily. I think I am a feminist, certainly. After the 2016 election, when I began to notice that I myself had a bit more of a platform as my work was becoming more and more produced, I
Right.
thought, okay, if I'm going to have this platform, perhaps I could have something more to say within
Right.
these comedic structures. So it has become more of a focal point for me, more of an interest. It has felt more important to really make that important in my
Yeah.
writing. Yeah. And even in Clue, I did the stage adaptation of the film Clue,
Mhm.
which is all over the place now, which is so exciting. But even in Clue, there is an undertone of feminism that I don't think existed necessarily in the film. And it's nothing blatant. It's not
Yeah.
overt, or it's just kind of an undercurrent. Yeah. So
Well,
you go ahead.
I was just gonna say it can be as simple as point of view. When I worked with you on The Cottage,
Yeah.
which I know was kind of not directly inspired, but sort of informed by Noel Coward and Hay Fever and
Yeah.
these lovely kind of comedy of manners, which are always told from a male perspective.
Exactly.
All you really did is you made the protagonist, the central character, a female.
Yeah.
Same structure, same story, but just with a different point of view. To the point that feminists, I want to be very clear, it's not overtly political. It doesn't become diatribe. Like the plays are still just funny for the sake of being funny. It's just the point of view. We're just looking at it through a slightly different lens. And I think you go back to the word gentle. I think that's exactly the same thing you're doing here.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think it's as simple as saying this story is coming from the perspective of the woman.
Right.
Period. That's it.
That's it.
A story that is inherently female, that's being told from the perspective of the woman, is in and of itself feminist. Because so much of the plays that are in the canon of American theater are told from the perspective not just of a male playwright, but also a lead male character. So just
Right.
to make the lead of the play a woman and to make the focus of the play what that woman wants, what obstacles that woman encounters, how she's going to deal with whatever comes her way throughout the course of the play, it makes the play itself feminist because you're exploring a woman and what she wants and what she's
Yeah.
after. And that's interesting to me. So that's sort of where my plays sit.
That's great. I want to wrap up the kind of this comedy chat with, you mentioned in an interview that you're a big believer in the Carol Burnett quote that comedy is simply tragedy plus time, which I know gets I've heard that I've seen multiple people attributed that quote to.
Yeah, sure.
Um, but for you, unpack that. When you hear comedy is tragedy plus time, which sounds great. It's like E equals MC squared, right? Oh, of course. But what does that really mean to you?
Yes. I think it ties into a famous quote from Nora Ephron's mother, actually, who also said, everything is copy. And I think that's what it means, essentially, is that your own life experience, as dark as it may get, if you give it enough space, if you let it breathe for long enough, if you come at it from the right perspective, you can find the humor in it. You can find something to humanize. And when you humanize something, the humor is right there because that's life. So you just kind of have to keep your eyes peeled for any given circumstance that can be twisted on its head just a bit and make way for comedy. Like in this play, Houston, that I'm talking about, there's a scene that is a direct pull from my own life where
Oh,
yeah, I had a broken foot, so I was
oh,
in a wheelchair, and me and my parents were going to MD Anderson Hospital in Houston to seek leukemia treatment for my dad at the time. And we walked in, and two things happened immediately, which in the moment I didn't think were funny, but now in retrospect I'm like, oh my God. The first thing was we were accosted by a clown. A grown man dressed as a clown in the lobby of this cancer hospital, handing out balloons in a full clown makeup and the whole thing. And the three of us were like shell-shocked to be in this place, shell-shocked to find ourselves in this position, but then a clown. And so all three of us collectively as a family, we were like, avoid the clown, avoid the clown, avoid the clown. And we like moved. And the second thing was that when we went to check in, because I had injured myself and was in a wheelchair, the assumption was that I was the patient.
you
So there
needed
was a
help,
bit on a
right?
Who's on First routine about who was the cancer patient, because it wasn't me. And then my parents were like, oh no, she's fine. She just, it's him. He's the one with cancer. It was awful. But see, you're laughing. So in that moment, I assure you, we were not laughing.
Oh, of
But
course not.
but this is more than 20 years ago now. So since time has provided me the opportunity to look back and say, oh my God. And then when you frame that onto the stage, you can create laughter for your audience, even though you're amidst a backdrop of a really serious topic.
Yeah.
So I think that's what Carol Burnett, or whoever said it before her, was talking about.
Hey, this is Jason, and we'll get right back to the show. But I wanted to let you know that Page and Stage is way more than this podcast. If you go check out pageandstage.art, that's pageandstage.art, you'll find a weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, encouragement, and inspiration for storytellers of all stripes. You'll also find the online bookshop for Ibis Books, which is the publishing wing of Page and Stage. And if you are working on your play, novel, memoir, or speech, you can even set up some one-on-one story coaching with me. Again, that's pageandstage.art. And now back to my conversation with Sandy Rustin. Great. Sandy, I want to ask you a little bit about your literal writing process.
Sure.
We talked a little bit about, improv, sketch brain, playwright brain. I'm sure your actor brain even comes into the mix too. I saw a quote from you in an interview that you said that all works are always half finished. So I'm curious what that means to you and how you ever get anything on stage.
Well, I will say that I don't allow perfectionism to get in the way of completing something.
Yeah.
Every single play I've ever had on stage, when I sit in the audience, I see something to fix. And I have to say to myself, oh, well, it's good enough. They're laughing anyway. It's happening anyway. I think you can't help but it feels like a living, breathing thing. It doesn't ever feel done to me. And I know a lot of writers feel that way. I think that's why I could never really be a novelist, because
Oh.
you print it and you send it out and you can't be like, no, on page 282, what I really meant to say was.
Right.
Whereas with a play, sure, it goes to print, but when you're a living playwright, you can go back to the publishing company and say, you know what, I changed scene 8. Here's the updated version. Can this be the updated script? So I think of all of my plays as a work in progress, even once they've been up on the stage. So that's what I meant by that.
So we mentioned a few titles here. We have stuff like The Cottage, Suffragists, Murder, Houston, original work.
Yeah.
Then also you have Clue, and you have the American Doll musical. I'm messing up that title.
That's
I'm so
okay.
sorry.
It was called Camp American Girl. That was
Right.
based on that was commissioned from Mattel.
Right, from Mattel. So your own kind of Barbie universe there.
Yes, exactly.
So you have both original work and adaptation.
Yeah.
In your flow side by side.
Yes.
Do you have to engage with those in different ways? Is one of them easier? Is one of them scarier? Do you find places where they intersect?
Yes. So, because exactly what you've said is so true about my career over the last decade, especially, that I have simultaneously, I'll be commissioned or hired, sort of doing a job of creating a piece of theater based on existing IP, and also simultaneously developing my own ideas and wanting to pursue my own passion projects. I have sort of made a commitment to myself to always try to have one of each going, or at least
Oh,
one of each, I
interesting.
should say. Because it exercises two different parts of the brain. There is a total delight and pleasure in having a job as a playwright. I enjoy having existing material to adapt. It's a different kind of a challenge. You're gifted characters, a plot, generally a tone or a style. You get a lot of information from the get-go that you have to work with and mold and shape. And of course, I want to bring my own voice to it. But it's a much more collaborative process from the get-go when you're doing an adaptation, because typically there are producers involved already from early stages. With Mystic Pizza, which is the musical adaptation I'm working on now, that has, I'm engaged with the film company, with the original screenwriter, with the music publishing people. There's a lot of different people that have input. I find that really exciting and collaborative and cool. But it's also, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I'm not the only one there having an opinion about how the show might play. Whereas with an original piece, it's all me. It's me in the shower or on a walk with a dog being like, ooh, what would be cool? And spending sort of time with myself, developing concept. And then once I feel ready, sitting down and pouring it out and taking that time to do it on my own, hoping that somebody will say, sure, I'll read that. Oh, that's
Right.
interesting. Yeah, I'd like to produce that. There's no income at that
Right.
moment, right?
Yep.
So it's sort of like one thing affords me the opportunity to do the other. And I enjoy both. I find pleasure in both styles of writing. Right now, actually, I'm working on this show that is not an adaptation. It is an original concept, but it's based on an existing historical event.
Oh,
And
okay.
the idea was brought to me by a producer. So it's almost like a mashup of those two things, because
Yeah.
I will be collaborating and working with somebody who's almost essentially hiring me to develop a show, but it's a show I want to develop just based on an idea that somebody else brought to me, but I have to make the whole thing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of the above, Jason,
Yeah.
I
And
guess.
that parallel track thing, it reminds me of a piece of advice that Mark St. Germain gave in a workshop that I now share with all my writing students, which is, and I think you've met Mark, crossed paths with him at Florida
Yes.
Studio Theater a couple times.
Yes.
But Mark very intentionally says that he always has two projects he's working on. Doesn't matter what genre or for who or for what or commission or not, but he always intentionally has two, so that if he creatively like crashes into a wall in one of them, instead of sitting there going, woe is me, and trying to climb an impenetrable wall, he'll just go, okay, and hop over to the other project and work on that while his subconscious works on the wall. And when he hits a wall again, he just jumps back. He just jumps back and forth whenever he hits that wall, so that he's always moving forward, at least on one thing, and trusting his, like, as you said, in the shower, walking the dogs. I do half of my writing on my runs.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that Mark said that. I have never organized that thought as well as you just put it. But yes, I mean, I always have a bunch of different projects going at the same time. And people will often say, like, how can you be doing so many things at the same time? Or how do you keep it all straight or whatever? To me, it feels necessary because
Yeah.
I work on one thing either until I'm like in such a frenzy, I have to finish it. And then that one thing gets done. Or I work on it till I, exactly what you just said, I reach a point where I think, all right, I want to let that rest for a while.
Yeah.
It's like cooking,
Yeah.
right? Like you take it out of the oven,
Totally.
it's got to cool, rest, see if it's the right temperature, see if it needs some more spices. It's the same deal. That's why I love cooking. It feels the same to me, playwriting and cooking.
Oh my goodness, that's a whole other episode. We'll have to get a blog with your favorite recipes.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Speaking of food, though, Mystic Pizza. So this,
Yeah.
I want to go back to this because I'm trying to imagine not just all the cooks in the kitchen, but this happens more often with superhero movies. But you've got like fans to worry about. I was going to say fans to please, but fans to worry about. Like that's kind of a cult picture.
Well,
My
yeah, I will say having developed Clue, which talk about fans and a cult following. I mean, Clue is like
yeah,
a Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of experience for devout fans to the
yeah.
film. So if I made it through Clue, I'm doing okay with Mystic Pizza. Mystic Pizza, Clue has really iconic lines of dialogue
Yes.
that had to be in the play. It had iconic characters, plot
Yeah.
points, costumes, storylines. There were really big pulls from the film that had to be present in the stage play.
Right.
Mystic Pizza doesn't have that. There was no music to speak of that, we weren't
Mhm.
going to use anything from the sort of the film score of the film. We're using hits from the 80s and 90s, not related to the film itself. We had the three girls. Those are our main characters and their love interests, I put into quotes. But other
Right.
than that, and Leona, the woman who owns and runs the pizza shop, the rest of it was really for us to develop and figure out how were we going to turn this into a musical. And we knew we wanted it to be a jukebox musical, but the way I did it is I wrote it as a play first with no
Oh,
music at
okay.
all so that I could really understand who wants what, how is this happening, does this play function without music?
Yes.
Where do we heighten to a point where music will help us get to the next place so that I'm always trying to use music to forward us to the next part of the play. So it's not standalone, which often happens in a jukebox musical, that you feel
Yeah.
like the scenes have been shoehorned in to a score and you're just there to do the bidding of the score. I didn't want that for this show.
Yeah.
So that was my biggest challenge with Mystic Pizza, really, was figuring out how do I make this an authentic play, a play
Yeah.
worthy of seeing with real women who want real things and, have something to say. It's a real coming of age story of these three girls in a meaningful way. And then how can the music enhance that experience for our audience?
Okay.
And so coming at it from that perspective has helped to make it feel like way more than a jukebox musical. And
Yeah.
that has been my most satisfying feedback now that the show is up and running and starting to play everywhere is, people say, God, I came in expecting this like cotton candy jukebox musical and it's so much more than that. This, people really are delighted to see how these women come of age. And it's a huge dose of nostalgia, obviously.
Oh, of course.
You get the movie, you get the music from the era and all of that, but you're also watching it through a contemporary feminist lens. And that's been really cool.
Okay, I'm going to nerd out here a little bit.
Oh, sure.
You've used the term jukebox musical, and for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar, that's a musical that takes already known songs, already popular songs, and weaves them into the story. A
Correct.
lot of jukebox musicals also tend to be more in the review or cabaret style.
Yeah.
where the music is the point. And as you said, the scenes, they sometimes barely exist, or they're an excuse for the songs.
Right.
So I'm curious here, Sandy, with Mystic Pizza, is this like in a musical where where the song isn't, let me be very clear. In a lot of jukebox musicals, the song's going to happen no matter what the scene is or what you say or do. So even if a character has an emotional point of view, they have to sing the Neil Diamond. They have to sing the Cher. They have no choice. Are you saying in Mystic Pizza, though, that these songs that we're going to know, that we'll sing along with, are like in a Rodgers and Hammerstein, that it comes out of the truth of that scene, that you're taking Heart or Berlin or Bruce Springsteen and I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And that's
exactly right.
literally what they're thinking. Those lyrics are literally their thoughts in the moment.
That's right. For the most
That's
part,
so hard.
it was
It's
really
so
yeah, it was really hard. I wanted it to feel like an authentic book musical, where I wanted the music that was in it to feel like it would feel if I was working with a composer and a lyricist.
right. That is, has anyone else done something? I'm trying to think of another show that kind of operates that way. I'm just trying to, because the danger there is, will the audience hear the song that way, or is it going to be karaoke time? You know what I
I
mean?
do
How
know
do
what you mean, and I really didn't want it to feel like karaoke time. Yeah, and it's been very fun and gratifying to sit in the audience and listen to audiences' peals of delight when they realize that the song they're hearing it from in a different perspective, in a different way, where the lyrics
yeah,
are meaning something different because it's now those words have something to say about what's happening on the stage,
it,
and
it's
people,
present tense. Yeah,
yeah, they delight in it because it's a unexpected use of the song or
yeah.
unexpected way to use the lyrics, or a different gender person is singing something, or it's a song that was written about a romance is now about sisterhood, or, you
Oh
name it.
wow.
So that's been really cool and a really fun way to develop a show.
Were there
And
a
I
lot
and
of
I
like,
should say I've had an enormously wonderful partner too. I mean,
oh,
lots of partners on this, but Carmel Dean did the orchestrations and arrangements for Mystic Pizza, and she was a huge partner. It was like having a composer lyricist partner along for the ride with me. And our director, Casey Hushin, who is also a close friend as well, was instrumental in song selection and just helping to define where the tone needed to be in order
yeah.
to really build the ebb and flow of the show. So it wasn't just me on my own.
Was there times where you had to go, oh, that song is wrong, and
Oh,
like
yes.
replace it with a different one and keep test driving different songs in that slot?
Absolutely. Yes, yes. Although it gets tricky the farther in the process you get, because eventually you have to start clearing the rights.
Yeah.
And once
Oh,
you
right.
clear
Of
the
course.
rights, then the producers had to set terms, so if you've got 20 songs, then each person, all those 20 people have a deal where they're getting 1/20th of, whatever they're. So if you're going to take out a song or you want to add a song,
Ugh.
it causes a lot of work for a lot of people. So eventually we hit a point where the producers were like, "This is our score. You can make
Mhm.
changes within it, but this is your musical vocabulary. You cannot
Yes.
add or subtract from this musical vocabulary." And so once we hit that day, that was like, "Okay, these
Yep.
are our songs," right? But we had some leeway in the end. But, we didn't get the rights to some of the songs that we wanted, and then we were
You had to
shocked.
replace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we got rights to amazing songs. I mean, I would say we got the rights to over 90% of the songs we wanted, which was
Wow.
amazing. Yeah.
And do you like, I'm still nerding out. Like,
That's okay.
so if is one of these songs, do you have reprises? Do
Oh,
you
yeah.
bring it back as a character's theme, just like you would in a brand new score? I mean, that
Yes.
is so cool.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
What is your favorite song in terms of when you went, oh, this is the perfect song for this moment and this character in this scene? Like, what was the most clear bell ringing moment for you in terms of I can weave this song in perfectly here?
Yes. There is a moment. I don't wanna give it away. I'll just say this, I'm not gonna say the song, but there is a moment where the character of Kat meets Tim for the first time, and it's instant puppy love, and the
Mhm.
song that we were able to use in that moment is perfect, and it's, like, funny and sweet, and the audience lights up from it, and I think that's my favorite use of music with scene, with book work, and the scene and the song intertwine for the entirety of the number, and it
Mhm.
was hard to do, And it was a huge collaborative effort because it also involves the staging. So it was the director, the choreographer, the orchestrator, arranger, all of us were like, okay, how do we make this work so the comedy of it will work? And I think we got it. So that's exciting.
Sandy, you also do a lot, and I mean a lot, of voiceover work and audiobook narration. And right now we're online together, and I see you in your little studio at home with the egg crates on the walls. How is that process different for you in terms of being a storyteller, in terms of not having a physical world? It's all in your voice, it's all in pitch and rhythm and timbre and tone. And where do you go process wise in terms of a voiceover, creating characters, narrating somebody else's work? Talk about that process for yourself.
Sure. I like doing audiobook work, and I have enjoyed it over these years where I have primarily been writing because it affords my brain a little escape into performance, which
Oh,
I
yeah.
which I miss, you know. Oftentimes when I'm writing a play, when I finish, when I sort of get to the point right before I would give it to somebody else to read and give me feedback, I read the whole play out loud as if I am each character in the play. So if there's 7 characters, I read it out loud 7 times for in the role of the just to see what that
Wow.
actor's journey is. So when I'm doing an audiobook, when I'm narrating a character over 400 pages, it sort of scratches that same itch of just diving into somebody else's shoes for a second. It feels really relaxing. It's
Mm.
very meditative to record an audiobook. I feel like it's just a different way to connect with audiences. Sometimes I love the books I'm recording, sometimes I don't love the books I'm recording. Either way, it still is adding to our family's insurance plan. So, it's like a day job. I mean, really and truly, the books I record are through the Screen Actors Guild, and that affords our family health insurance because
Yeah.
my husband and I are both freelance. And so I feel enormously grateful that I have been able to have this parallel career. Most of the time, it means that from like 8:30 to 10 o'clock at night, I'm in this booth recording. And I do my whole regular day. I have dinner with my family, the whole thing. And then once the evening's sort of settling down, I have my second job and I come in here.
We've talked about Clue a couple times. If I have this number right, there have been over 3,500 productions of Clue. It's one of the most produced plays in the country right now. So my question, though, is about when something like this strikes oil, basically, and it's a gusher, does that impact how you feel in terms of process versus product? Like you were talking about, when you're writing your own material, you're not making an income and you almost can't be attached to what the outcome might even be. But now that you are famous, now that you've been on Broadway, now that you have all these things that there's a name attached and there's expectation attached. I mean, Edie Brickell, I mean, now you're up in this kind of stratospheric place. Does that put different pressures on you in terms of your process, knowing that there are more external expectations on the product?
God, Jason, I haven't thought of it like that. You're making me nervous. Um, I haven't thought of it like that, truly. In
Well,
fact,
that's good then.
it's
I was
yeah.
curious.
It's funny that you say it like that. I guess my husband would say I have to update my internal resume. I I don't think about it like that. I just don't. I feel lucky anytime anybody wants to produce my work. I think when this however you might deem this stage of my career as far as success goes, I will be 48 this month. So I've been in this business since I was 22. So that's a long time of just doing the work. Having this year is certainly gratifying and wonderful that the last couple of years have afforded new opportunities and doors open is wonderful. But I am so mindful of how quickly that can shift, how
Yeah.
it's just all fickle. What isn't fickle is that I love to do it and I'll just keep doing it. And if this year is a anomaly, okay, I don't know. I just don't view it like that. I view it like, holy cow, what a great year. I'm so glad all these people are enjoying the thing that I enjoy too. And I leave it there. And I just move on. I don't spend too much time thinking about stratospheres or any of that kind of stuff at all. I really don't.
That's good. I think that's kind of vital. It goes all the way back to, you used a wonderful term earlier, wildly healing. that in a way your mission almost, just this mindset of I'm just glad people are getting enjoyment out of it. That's the mindset you have to
That's it.
maintain and curate for yourself.
For sure. And to be honest, I don't think it's a mistake that this is happening now post-pandemic, because
Mm,
I think that audiences are aching for this kind of release in the theater. And so as a result, there's an interest in the kind of work that I've been producing for a long, long time. People are now like, oh, wait, this lady writes comedy. Let's see what she's got going on. Like, I could use a laugh,
right. Yeah.
right? And so I was just in the had the right scripts at the right time, I think.
I do have to tag on here because I believe this will probably not drop until May or June, but it's April right now when we're talking. And I also turned 48 this month.
Hey, happy birthday.
You too. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
I want to ask one more question about the cottage
sure.
in terms of process, because I think a lot of storytellers out there don't always understand just how much time, and to your point, how much work it actually takes. It was about 10 years, right? From first draft with cardboard sets at a reading all the way up through various regional productions to the Broadway production. Is that
That's
about
right.
right, timeline wise?
Yeah, it was
Can you
10
just
years.
walk us through the major
Sure.
5 or 6 like high points of the steps of that 10-year process?
Sure. So I had the idea to write The Cottage for a while. I had been thinking about it in the shower and on dog walks for quite
Right.
some time.
Yes. Of
And
course.
then I got the first draft out in about a week, and I shared it with
Oh.
a collaborator that I was working with at the time. And he said, this is fun, but it's only fun. I
Mm.
think there's space to deepen this here. You know, right now it just feels like cotton candy. I think you could have more meat and potatoes in here, which I thought was great advice. And I really
Yeah.
took it to heart and did a bunch of rewrites. And then at the time, I was co-artistic director of a local theater company in my town where I live. I live just outside of New York City, and we have this beautiful performing arts center. And I shared the script with my friend who is a casting director in our town. She's a casting director in the city, but she lived in our town, and she loved it. And she said, I think we should do like just a reading of this. Let's do a reading of this at the Performing Arts Center, and we'll invite people. And so I cast my friends that, live in my town that are all actors, and we did a reading of it, and we probably had 100 people in the audience, and people loved it. And so there was a lot of laughter. So that night she said, is it okay if I share this with some artistic directors that I know at different theaters? And that led to our first production that was at Queens, the Astoria Performing Arts Center in Queens, which was located in the basement of a Korean church in Astoria, in a gymnasium, like basketball hoops, a stage, you get the drill. And this amazing set designer named Stephen Dobey designed that set on a $1,000 budget and made it look like an English cottage in 1923. I mean, it was remarkable. And on that opening, his agent is a man named Max Grossman. Max attended to see his set designer client's set
Oh,
and
wow.
came up to me and said, are you represented? And I said, no. And he said, come meet me next week. And I did. And that began my relationship with Max, I think that was in 2012, maybe 2013. And Max remains a very integral part of my professional life. And we've moved together through the years, and now he's an agent at UTA. So that's where I'm represented now. And together over the years, he and I helped to get that show in various regional productions. So that initial production in Queens led to another production in Queens, led to a regional premiere at Theater Aspen, led to,
Yeah.
all the way to you, Jason, at
Yep.
FSP. And it was really a 10-year developmental process. And at different points along the way, people would come to me and say, I want to option this. I think this should be a Broadway play. That happened a couple of times. A couple of times it fell apart. Then it happened again right before the pandemic. I went back and did 8 shows a week in this musical called Found for a little while. Well, this was 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little more, 7 years ago, maybe. And the woman who was producing that was lamenting to me that she didn't have very much female-driven content to produce. And I said, well, I'm a writer too. I have this play. So she read it, and she said, if you can get a celebrity director attached, I think we can get this made
Wow.
in New York. And I was like, how am I ever going to find, I don't know celebrity directors. Well, Max, my agent, I shared that information with him, And so he took it then to the agency. So when Jason Alexander, who was represented at that same agency, came and said, I'm ready to make my directorial debut. What do you have? I'd like to do a new comedy. They gave him a stack of new comedies and he gravitated to this one. So I flew out to
Wow.
LA. I met with him. So that was starting in around 2016, 2017.
Oh, wow.
He and I started to do readings and workshops together at various theaters that were considering producing it in New York. So we did one reading and then we did a workshop at Manhattan Theater Club. It was actually that workshop at Manhattan Theater Club that got me the job of writing Clue because those
Ah,
producers
good.
were there. Yeah. Then we had Jason, then the pandemic.
Yeah.
So then everything shut down. Once the pandemic opened up again, we got the theater, the Hayes Theater, and they said, in order to sign this contract, you'll need a box office star name attached. And Jason is really good friends with Eric McCormack. And Eric read the script and signed on the next day. And by that
Wow.
Friday, we had the Hayes. So it was a real long 10-year buildup to,
And then all at once.
and then it was like, we had the Hayes on a Wednesday and we needed a star. We got a star on Thursday. We signed the contract on Friday. We went into rehearsals 6 months later. So it was a long journey.
And so instructive too, I think, that how many different other connections, like people you meet because of people you meet because of, then
Yeah,
you get Clue. I mean, just
totally.
to the point again, so much is not in our control except just doing the work.
Yes,
You know,
definitely.
Sandy, I always like to wrap up with a couple questions and a spotlight for you.
Okay.
So the first question is, what is the best advice that you have ever taken?
Well, I'll give you two answers. So I had a playwriting teacher when I was in college. I studied in London. I had a playwriting teacher named Stuart Brown who said, if you want to call yourself a playwright, you should always be reading somebody else's play. And I have taken that to heart throughout my life. And I think it's such great advice as a writer. You should know what else is out there. What are people working on? What do you like and what don't you like? How does that
Yeah.
impact your own voice and what you might put on the page one day? So that's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice is to be kind. And I know that sounds kind of Pollyanna, but I think it's really important as we work in this business to be really mindful of the hundreds and hundreds of people who are working on our plays. Because
Mhm.
as the playwright, it was your initial idea that started this whole thing. But when you walk into that tech rehearsal and there are hundreds of people in all different departments and nobody's looking to you with any questions, the play is no longer in your hands. It has been given to other people to manage, to operate, to produce. And it is a scary but awe-inspiring moment. And
Yeah.
I think those people, the sound operator, the usher, the security guard outside, these are people who are there to help provide an incredible experience of your work. And I have found that leading with kindness and being a person in the room that is interested in knowing all of these people and really values what each individual person is bringing to the table only serves to create a great experience for everybody involved. And who knows? I have somebody who's producing one of my plays right now who, when I first met him 25 years ago, was an assistant stage manager on a
Right.
touring production. And now he's a Broadway producer. So not to say be nice because you never know when somebody can do something for
Right.
you later on. Be nice for the sake of being kind. But it creates an environment where karma comes back
Yeah.
in good ways. So,
That's great. Thank you.
yeah.
And then flip side, what is the worst advice that you have ever given?
The worst advice that I have ever given, well, it's probably advice I've given to myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I think as a young actor and a young writer and a young mom, I was often just telling myself to give up.
Hmm.
It's not worth it. Just go do something else. I became a mortgage broker for a while.
Oh,
Yeah, it was exhausting and hard, and rejection was unbearable. And I couldn't understand how to do both, parenthood and theater at the same time. And I thought it would never happen for me because I was going to be 30 and then 35 and then 40 and then 45. And so I was down on myself a lot. And fortunately, I had a husband who was like, nope, you're not giving up. I believe in you. Yeah. So I would say the worst advice I ever got was advice I gave myself. How's that?
Know thyself. That's good. Great, Sandy. And last spotlight for you. Tell everyone listening how they can learn more about you, where to find you online, or socials or handles, or what projects you have coming up they can check out. This
Sure.
floor is yours.
So you can always follow me on Instagram. I'm at Sandy Rustin with a little underscore after the N, or on my website, which is sandyrustin.com. Right now, what's playing is the national tour of Clue, which is going all over the place. So you can check out the Clue. I think it's like Clue. If you just Google national tour of Clue, the website with the schedule will come up. But I believe
Yeah, I'll
it's
find that.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the show summary for everybody.
Oh, great. I think it's
Yeah.
booking through 2026 already. So
Wow.
hopefully it'll come to a city near you.
Yeah.
The Suffragettes' Murder is going to premiere at the Denver Center for Performing Arts in January and is available for licensing through Broadway Licensing. Mystic Pizza will premiere. It'll have its East Coast premiere at Paper Mill Playhouse in February, and looks like that's going to launch a national tour soon as well. So that's exciting. The Cottage is available for licensing, and I think there'll be some exciting theaters that are going to be producing that soon. So that is something to look forward to as well.
Sandy, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all that. Just such useful and kind and healing stuff for the listener today. Thank you so much.
It was my total pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Page and Stage podcast. All my thanks to this week's guest and to all of you out there for listening. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites, links, and upcoming projects in the episode summaries. And you can become a backer of this podcast by clicking support over at pageandstage.art. Send me your thoughts and questions at jason@pageandstage.art. I always love to hear from you, and I'll be featuring your questions on future episodes. This podcast is built with Alitu, the all-in-one online podcasting app created by Colin and his amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. Thank you again for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.